The first German Reich, or empire, according to German history, was that founded by Charlemagne, whose remains are enshrined in the Cathedral of Aachen. Known as the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, it encompassed most of Europe and lasted over 1,000 years. The architect of the Second Reich was Prince Otto von Bismarck, whose massive monument stands near Cologne. Ruled by the Hohenzollern dynasty, which he had engineered, ended abruptly after just 47 years when Germany lost the First World War and became a republic. Hitler's Third Reich extended its grip through the use of treachery and ruthless force over much of Europe, leading to World War II, the most destructive in history. When the Nazi regime finally collapsed and Germany surrendered, her cities were heaps of rubble in a country devastated, divided, and occupied by the victorious Allies. The Third Reich, planned for 1,000 years, had lasted merely 12. This is Germany today, rebuilt, busy, prosperous. The change is almost too hard to grasp. Less than a generation ago, nothing but ruins, refugees, and expellees from the East Zone, millions of them. Germany, written off by the experts as a viable country for the next 100 years. 2/5 of all dwellings, 5 million in all, destroyed or severely damaged. The consequences of their war stared the Germans in the face everywhere. Amidst the outcry for their collective punishment and demands for restitution, they doggedly set about to salvage from the rubble what they could, and somehow to get things moving again. Slowly, here and there, rebuilding began on a very small scale, where materials could be found or reclaimed. Refugee camps were set up by the occupation powers for the flood of homeless children orphaned by the war, and for the thousands of young men who had fled the Russian-occupied zone before the escape routes were cut off by barbed wire and a heavily mined strip of land stretching all across the country. For soon after victory, the wartime alliance between Russia and the Western Allies had fallen apart. The country's division would become permanent. There would be 2 German states. For the 50 million Germans in the Western Zone, this marked the start of the turnaround. The Allies realized they would have to help them back on their feet, lest they become a dangerous problem in the developing East-West conflict, while a Germany rebuilt could become Europe's workshop. In 1947, General George C. Marshall, then U.S. Secretary of State, proposed an extensive aid and mutual assistance program for Europe's war-ravaged countries. Germany was to be included. The following year, the Allies ordered the inflated and all but worthless old Reichsmark replaced, 10 for 1, with the new currency, the Deutschmark, which carried an assigned recognized value. Thus, Germans lost 90% of their paper savings, but could buy things for the rest. At the same time, the Marshall Plan, which had been passed by Congress, went into effect. With its massive shipments of grains and other foodstuffs, it helped provide the minimum nutritional level that people needed to work again. It supplied coal and coke to heat and start up production in such plants as could be made to operate. It furnished building materials and machinery to make repairs and new equipment. It replenished livestock decimated and degraded through years of war, replaced worn-out farm implements, and provided chemical fertilizer for the depleted soil. Over the ensuing 6 years, the Marshall Plan would pour more than $3 billion in goods and services into the German economy. In Western Germany, where farms are small and mostly family-owned, mechanized equipment was scarce. They had some overworked draft animals. The rest was human labor. Because of the war losses, there was a severe shortage of manpower. Refugee families from the East Zone were brought in to help fill the gap. Expelled and driven off their own farms, they were being resettled in rural areas of Western Germany, where they at first worked as construction laborers to provide simple housing for themselves. Then they went back to the fields where everyone, young and old, had to pitch in to provide food for the country. A succession of good harvest seasons aided their effort. Gradually, as mechanized farm implements became more available, farming efficiency improved. By 1950, West German agricultural production had already reached pre-war levels. Together with the continuing imports through the Marshall Plan, there was enough to go around, and the new West German government, which had been installed by the occupation, decreed the end of food rationing. Slowly, as damage was repaired and rubble cleared away, villages and small towns not severely hit by bombing or heavy fighting regained their pre-war appearance. It was different in the cities. Damage would remain visible for many years, but essential services were functioning again, and the daily work routine had resumed at near normal levels. Restoration of full industrial production had top priority now. A newly created European coal and steel community accepted West Germany as full member. New mining machinery was brought into the Rhine-Ruhr district, whose vast coal reserves were needed in much of Western Europe. Combined labor management committees, meeting with government representatives, pledged full cooperation and quick settlement of any disputes in the interest of recovery in which they all had a stake. Recovery was indeed dramatic. Within a surprisingly few years, the famed and sometimes notorious heavy Rhineland industries, not so long ago destroyed or dismantled and outlawed, went back into operation. By 1953, West Germany's steel output exceeded pre-war levels and totaled 40% of the whole European coal and steel community. Her trade was in balance. A year later, she had earned a trade surplus of over $1 billion. Her occupation status was ended, and she turned her full energy to the reconstruction of her cities. Subways were dug where bombs had fallen. Damaged city sections were leveled and rebuilt from scratch to meet modern needs. Historic edifices were restored at great cost, sometimes to stand incongruously amidst the new architecture. But the most urgent attention was given to schooling, which had suffered badly during the war and post-war chaos. Classroom and teacher shortages had to be overcome. Thorough grounding in the basic skills for the Nachwuchs, the new crop, early and proficient vocational training, and up-to-date science instruction in high schools and colleges was now doubly important for a Germany determined to regain her prominent position among modern industrial nations. Within a decade, some of these students would be found on research teams in the rebuilt, newly equipped laboratories of Germany's most important chemical concerns, experimenting with innocuous substances derived from petroleum, rearranging their molecular structure, fusing them under intense heat and pressure with 98% plain air to obtain a new material of light weight and great strength. Progressing from the laboratory stage to industrial production, it would be turned out in huge, easy-to-move blocks. They could be cut and bonded. Reinforced with steel rods and molded into complete wall sections with cutouts for windows or doors, ready for quick mounting and finishing inside and out. Construction of large-scale housing projects, a pressing need, was speeded up significantly by the new process, which soon found its use in other countries. The Common Market had been founded, an economic community of 6 nations, including Germany, who had agreed gradually to eliminate all tariffs between each other and to trade their resources and products on mutually favored terms. The 6 were later joined by 3 more countries. As an equal partner in the community, Germany could now count on preferential treatment in a market of nearly 200 million people with rising living standards and steadily increasing consumer demands. Her big industrial concerns, back in business, working at capacity, and expanding rapidly, had exploration teams out searching everywhere for additional new sources of energy and raw materials. Industry runs on oil. More drilling rigs went up in the state of Lower Saxony, where major German crude oil fields are located. Quiet little towns had to get used to the noise of the drilling and the sight of the oil pumps on their outskirts. For them, it meant added income. For the country, that much less oil to import. Construction crews were busy laying a pipeline to Germany from the Netherlands, where a huge deposit of natural gas had been discovered. German chemical firms had bought a large share of the find to use it in the manufacture of plastics, drugs, dyes, and many other products. German mines stepped up their output. Potash embedded between rock layers at a depth of 1,000 feet was hauled to the surface in ever-increasing quantities. Important as fertilizer and used as ingredient in glassmaking, it was a valuable export item as well. In time, Germany's potash production ranked second only to that of the United States. Most raw materials, native or imported, were bulk loaded and shipped by barge to the industrial center of Western Germany. Here, strung out along the banks of the Rhine, lie the plants that make up the economic backbone of the country. The vast chemical complexes, completely rebuilt with their new research laboratories and production facilities, developing new dyes and drugs, pesticides and plastics. The renowned Jena Glass Works, relocated at Mainz in the western zone, producing high-purity optical glass for satellite windows and bubble chambers, scientific equipment for laboratories, and klystron tubes for nuclear accelerators, testing new glass compounds for the consumer market, tempered glass, impervious to sudden temperature change, chemicals, fabrics, glass, machinery. German industry had made its comeback. Production everywhere was in full swing. From promoted abroad by an army of highly skilled, aggressive salesmen, offering quality merchandise at competitive prices, goods with the label Made in Western Germany soon regained the reputation for craftsmanship which pre-war Germany had once enjoyed and found a receptive market in many parts of the world. Her sales abroad, climbing year after year, more than paid for the raw materials and foodstuffs she had to import. At home, agricultural output improved with increasing mechanization and government-sponsored consolidation of split-up parcels of land. With growing prosperity, German dietary habits had changed, and so had many a farmer's crops. Instead of growing potatoes as he had for 20 years following the war, Farmer Eberhard planted feed grains and clover for the 60 dairy cows that he had acquired. His grown-up son could handle most of the field work, his wife the mechanical milkers. Even the cleaning of the newly built barn was accomplished with a motorized rig. Twice a day, the milk was picked up by the local cooperative for processing and marketing. It was a good business, less work and more profit than in potatoes. Visitors to Western Germany looked with amazement at the well-stocked markets, the well-cared-for children, the crowded new stores and shopping malls filled with prosperous-looking people. This was the country the experts had written off, the cities that had been destroyed in that nightmarish past. And this was the present, a mere 2 decades later. It was hard to believe. The experts credited the Marshall Plan, European cooperation, astute leadership, but above all, the restored vitality and perseverance of the German people. The Germans called it simply das Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. There were more jobs than people to fill them. Wages were rising. So were prices. People could afford some luxuries, and here and there, a little gamble. Banks were bulging with savings and profits from foreign trade. The value of the Deutschmark kept rising, and business was bouncing ahead. To ease the labor shortage, foreign workers were recruited from countries with low wages and high unemployment. They manned assembly lines. They worked in the shipyards that were busy with German and foreign orders, and in the loading areas of the ports. Officially, the aliens, soon there were over 2 million of them, were carried on the books as Gastarbeiter, guest workers. It sounded friendly. Also, this time around, they had come of their own free will. They served as laborers on highway construction and plant expansion projects. Italians, Spaniards, Yugoslavs, Turks, and Greeks. Some worked as waiters, their women as domestics. Hard hats from Spain were employed at the airport of Frankfurt, erecting the framework for new service hangars, large enough to shelter half a dozen jumbo jets at once. They would be part of a new multi-level terminal facility for Europe's fastest-growing airport. Frankfurt, once more an international center of commerce, pressed for downtown space, was crowding massive modern office buildings against old gabled homes. Beyond the outskirts, connected by a high-speed subway, rises Northwest Centrum, a self-contained satellite town, the 4-level core with its shopping malls surrounded by green belts with clusters of apartment buildings, playgrounds, and schools, and entered like a fortress over pedestrian ramps. Building everywhere, families laboring together to have their own modest home. Cities, their surface streets choked with traffic, installing passageways and shopping centers underground. New bridge spans reaching out and joining across the Rhine. Plowing the fields, scraping the slopes, earth movers gouging out new highway routes that will bring the countryside closer to the city and transform the hamlet into a suburb. Then, in summer, hordes of city dwellers hurry back to nature with their campers, tents, and trailers. And tourists throng the old romantic towns that advertise good food, quaint corners, and medieval torture chambers. At Munich, they visit the Hofbrauhaus, a beer hall, Bavarian center of Gemütlichkeit, notorious as cradle of Hitler's Nazi movement that made Germany the scourge of Europe and brought on the war that led to her own destruction. The beer hall has long been restored. Gemütlichkeit is back. Nearby, the town of Dachau promotes its scenic attractions right at the entrance of what was one of the most infamous Nazi concentration camps. Dachau, a memorial now, dedicated by a post-war German government to countless thousands of victims. A reminder for all Germans, for all people, of 12 years of barbarity beyond comprehension. Dachau, one granite coffin, and a solemn promise on a wall of stone. But this is a new generation. West Germany is now an ally. At the city of Gießen, on Armed Forces Day, Germans proudly inspect their country's modern weapons. Their children are permitted to climb a tank, to turn a crank, to ride a turret. It's just like a merry-go-round. Then the traditional parade, the marching tunes, the customs and uniforms of yore, the trumpets and the drums. And special guests, young Israelis whose parents had escaped the Holocaust. And Frenchmen, once enemies, now neighbors from across the border. In another city, Belgian troops assigned to duty with NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Forces, commemorate their Day of Independence in a German church. British NATO units are patrolling a sector of the East German border. A task force of the U.S. Navy, calling at the port of Hamburg, is greeted by a Sunday crowd. It's all part of the so-called NATO umbrella. Under its protection, Germans of all walks of life live well. This, they hope, will not change. Around them, they see the symbols of prosperity and of consumption. It gives them cause to cheer. But there is the other Germany. The Germany they may not enter. The hostile border, being reinforced and mined by Germans so that other Germans may not escape. There are the many thousands of expellees from former eastern provinces clamoring for the return of their homes, their cities, their land, which is no longer can afford to ignore or to condone. And there is Berlin, the former capital, divided like the rest of the country. The eastern sector sealed off by the notorious wall. Behind it, barbed wire fences, steel traps, mines and guards who shoot on sight. Many escape attempts have come to a fatal end. Laborious negotiations between diplomatic envoys of the Western powers and their Russian counterparts in East Berlin have led to small improvements. West Germans, after careful screening, may, on special holidays, get passes to visit relatives living in the eastern sector. But East Germans may still not leave. The wall remains. And West Berliners, outwardly unconcerned, live on their island of bustling, precarious prosperity deep in the eastern zone, while the others behind the wall still must stand in line for food. Reunion is not in sight. It is verboten. The monument to the Russian soldier stands just inside the British sector of West Berlin. Every other hour, on the very site where the Nazi system was pounded to its final doom, Berliners can watch the changing of the Russian honor guards. One generation has passed. Memory slowly fades to history. And a new German is making his way back, cautiously but resolutely, moving on between his walls, determined to reach his bright new road to the uncertain future.